04:17 a.m. December 1st, 1950, east of the Chosin Reservoir, North Korea. The temperature had dropped to 35 degrees F, so cold that metal cracked like old bone and breath turned to ice before it left the mouth. The ridgeline above Fox Company was nothing but jagged silhouettes and the restless shiver of enemy movement. And at the center of a shallow, frozen trench stood Sergeant Elias Cooper, his right hand wrapped around an empty M1 Garand, his left hand shaking, not from fear, but from the cold that had begun to burrow into the marrow of every man left alive. He counted the shadows. 137 more behind them. Too many. Then came the whisper from Private Hanley, breath trembling, words fogging in the moonless dark. "Sergeant, we're out, every last round." Cooper didn't answer. He couldn't. He kept staring at the ridge as the realization calcified inside him. The mortar strike 2 hours earlier hadn't just collapsed their ammo tent, it had erased it. Everything. Clips, bandoliers, the crates of .3006 they'd dragged up the mountain, gone in 10 seconds of fire and godless luck. Now the Chinese infantry was closing in, wave after wave, their footsteps crunching on snow like the slow chewing of a predator that knew exactly how the meal would end. Cooper exhaled once. Steady, quiet, controlled. Then shouts. Enemy voices. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Fox Company consisted of 47 men at dawn. Now, by Cooper's last count, 12 were still breathing, scattered along a trench barely wide enough to crouch in, every rifle empty, every grenade already thrown. Their machine gun, warped from shrapnel, lay in a heap of frozen mud like a snapped spine. Retreat. There was nowhere to go. Behind them was a cliffside drop into darkness and wind. To the flanks, snowfields mined by both sides in overlapping patterns no one remembered anymore. Ahead, an enemy force that grew louder, closer, hungrier. Cooper felt the cold stinging his fingertips. The skin was splitting. Blood froze the moment it met the air. Another whisper reached him. "What do we do, Sarge?" He didn't answer. Not yet. Because in that moment, something shifted. A sound, faint, rhythmic, patterned, carried across the ridgeline. Drums, no, boots. Dozens of boots stamping into fresh snow, preparing for an assault charge. Cooper recognized the cadence, the Chinese 59th Division's tactic of synchronized foot-stomp intimidation, designed to break morale before the attack even started. And for the first time that night, Sergeant Elias Cooper felt something far more dangerous than fear. Clarity. He slowly lifted his empty rifle, looked along its iron sights as if weighing a shot that didn't exist. And then he said, calm and low, "They think we're done, that's their mistake." The men stared at him, not understanding, not yet. Cooper checked his watch. The second hand trembled from frost. He waited, counting heartbeats. Above them, a flare arced into the sky, enemy signal. The valley exploded in harsh white light, illuminating the snow, the jagged rocks, the rows of approaching silhouettes. Hanley hissed, "They're coming." Cooper didn't blink. "On my command," he said. "Raise rifles, aim, don't fire." The men exchanged looks of disbelief. Cooper continued. 3 seconds after they crest that ridge, every man yells "fire" and cycles his rifle like he's reloading. Slow, deliberate, like we're trying not to waste ammo. Hanley choked a nervous laugh. "Sarge, we don't have ammo to waste." "That's the point." Another flare, another blast of frozen light. Shadows spilled over the ridge. Then bodies, rows and rows of them. The Chinese infantry charged, shouting, rifles raised, bayonets catching the flare glow. Cooper inhaled. Held it. Waited. Now. He thrust his empty rifle forward. Company fire. 12 rifles snapped up. 12 voices screamed the word with every shred of breath they had left. 12 men pulled triggers that clicked on empty chambers, then yanked the charging handles with cold, stiff fingers, metal clacking, echoing, multiplying off the valley walls. Clack, clack, clack. Reload, reload, reload. A sound like a platoon. Then like a company. Then, if you squinted your ears, maybe even a battalion. The enemy charge hesitated. Slowed. Stumbled. Cooper saw it instantly, the flicker of doubt. He shouted again, louder. Second volley. Clack, clack, clack. 12 empty rifles became 50. Then 100. Echoes bouncing, overlapping, swelling into a phantom army. The enemy commander froze. His hesitation rippled outward. Men stopped, looked around, looked behind them. Cooper leaned forward, breath fogging, eyes locked on theirs. "Keep going," he whispered. Behind him, his squad prepared the third fake volley. And that's when the Chinese commander raised his hand. Cooper's eyes widened. A signal. Not of retreat, but of something far, far worse. The enemy began to flank. Before the frozen ridge, before the empty rifles and the echoing bluff that would hold back an army, there was a boy standing on the back porch of a collapsing farmhouse in rural Kansas, watching storms break the horizon like something alive. His name was Elias Cooper, and he had learned early that the world did not shout its warnings, it whispered them. Subtle signs, flickers at the edge of vision, little shifts in the wind that told you when something was coming for you. He grew up in the kind of poverty that didn't feel cinematic, just slow, grinding, and humiliating. His father drifted between jobs like a man searching for reasons to stay alive. His mother worked fields until her back warped into a permanent question mark. Elias, thin and quiet, listened more than he spoke. He listened to arguments, to silence, to how a single misplaced breath could trigger the next explosion in a household built on dry tinder. What he learned wasn't courage. It was timing. The Coopers lived by a single rule: don't draw attention. On the farm, attention meant trouble. In school, it meant fists. Elias wasn't big enough to fight and wasn't fast enough to run. So he improvised, talking his way out of beatings with the kind of psychological sleight of hand no one expected from a kid barely tall enough to see over his desk. He discovered early that people heard what they feared, not what was said. A hesitation could be a threat. A calm breath could be a warning. A look, just long enough, just steady enough, could scare off bullies bigger than he'd ever be. While other boys practiced throwing punches behind the barn, Elias practiced pauses, measured words, the kind of quiet that made others wonder what he wasn't showing them. His father called it cowardice. His mother called it survival. One winter night, when Elias was 12, a tornado carved a path through their county. Not one of those distant, slow-moving funnels you see on the news. This one roared through the dark like a creature dragging its claws across the earth. Most families hid in cellars, not the Coopers. Their cellar had collapsed years earlier and no one had money to rebuild it. His father froze, staring at the sky. His mother prayed. Elias acted. He dragged both of them into the crawl space beneath the kitchen floor, ignoring his father's shouts, ignoring splinters ripping through his palms. The storm hit moments later, peeling shingles off the roof like they were paper. The house moaned, something heavy snapped overhead. And his father, who had never thanked anyone for anything, whispered into the dark. "You saw it coming." That was the foundation. Not admiration. Recognition. From that night on, Elias was the one the family relied on, not for strength but for instinct, reading danger, reading people, knowing when the invisible line between normal and catastrophic was about to break. When the depression deepened, he worked nights at a grain mill. When war erupted overseas, he wrote his name at the bottom of the enlistment form without hesitation. Not out of patriotism, Elias had never been one for flags or slogans, but because conflict had always felt like the language he was born speaking. He understood tension, he understood stakes, he understood how fear shaped men and how those men tried desperately to hide it. Boot camp didn't change him, it clarified him. He wasn't the loudest or the strongest, he wasn't even the most accurate shot. He was the one everyone watched when things got strange, when something felt off, when a drill instructor's tone shifted, when a situation teetered between routine and disaster. Elias always knew the moment when the floor was about to give way. But it came at a price: distance. He lived inches removed from his own emotions, not because he lacked them, but because he couldn't afford to drown in them. That quiet detachment unnerved people, made them think he was cold. In reality, he was always listening, hearing storms before they arrived. And yet, even with that instinct, nothing prepared him for Korea. Nothing prepared him for the way cold stripped humanity off a man in layers, how mountains swallowed plans, how enemies moved in ghosts and numbers that felt impossible. But one part of him, the part shaped under floorboards during a storm, remained unbroken. He could still sense the split second when fear shifted to opportunity. The night his squad lost all ammunition wasn't the first time Elias Cooper had faced a force he could not outrun or overpower. It was simply the first time he decided to fight it with nothing at all. By the time Elias Cooper stepped onto Korean soil in 1950, the quiet kid from Kansas had already learned the difference between fear that paralyses and fear that sharpens. But the Marines would grind that distinction into steel. They always did. Training hadn't just toughened him, it had broken him down to the mineral level. Boot camp carved away anything soft and Korea took the rest. What remained wasn't a warrior in the traditional sense, no mythic hero swagger, no loud bravado. Cooper became something else entirely, a man who understood the battlefield the way a farmer understands storms. He didn't fight against chaos. He fought through it like someone who knew every swirl in the wind was trying to tell him something. It wasn't talent that made him stand out. It was what the instructors called that damn instinct. During a night navigation drill in California, the platoon got turned around in darkness thick enough to swallow voices. Compass readings contradicted each other. Men argued. Officers snapped orders into the void, but Cooper just stood still, eyes narrowed, breathing slow. A lieutenant barked at him, demanding he pick up the pace. Cooper simply said, "We keep going that way, sir, we circle back into the ravine." "How the hell would you know that?" the lieutenant snapped. Cooper didn't answer, there was nothing to say, he just knew. They followed him anyway, half mocking, half desperate, and 20 minutes later they hit the marker. No ravine, no wasted hours, just a straight shot to the finish. It wasn't heroism. It wasn't brilliance. It was pattern recognition at a bone-deep level. Still, not everyone appreciated it. Some officers found his quiet unsettling. Some peers resented how often Cooper's instincts proved right. A few even thought he was lucky until Korea stripped the concept of luck from every man unlucky enough to serve there. Chosin wasn't like other battlefields. It was a crucible of frozen hell. The mountains were white teeth under moonlight, jagged and waiting. The cold was a predator stalking lungs, eating skin, killing fingers one joint at a time. Rifles jammed, boots froze to ankles. Even breath felt like shards of glass cutting their way out. Men who'd breezed through training broke in hours, their confidence cracked by temperatures no human body was designed to endure. And the enemy? They weren't shadows. They were avalanches of flesh and resolve, disciplined and relentless, moving with a unity the Marines had only read about in briefing packets. Cooper adapted faster than most. He had always been good at noticing the invisible things, tiny changes in the wind, in sound, in the patterns of movement around him. Those skills translated well to the mountains where the enemy maneuvered like ghosts. He learned to identify them by rhythm alone. Stepping patterns, breath cadence, even the way snow compacted under their boots. But his greatest strength wasn't perception. It was his ability to stay calm inside terror. One of the senior sergeants, a man named Rudd, had once told him, "Most Marines are lions, they roar, they fight loud, that's how they stay alive. But you, Cooper, you're a wolf, quiet, watchful, you wait for the opening no one else sees." But even wolves break. October brought a supply line ambush that changed everything. Cooper's squad was pinned behind a ridge, enemy fire slicing the air so close it bent the fabric of sound. The squad leader panicked, shouting contradictory orders until chaos drowned them all. Men froze, others bolted. It was the kind of moment where death stacked fast and stupid. Cooper didn't yell. He simply acted. He pulled 2 men down into cover by their collars, crawled forward under fire to signal the others, waited for the enemy's reload rhythm, moved the squad one by one between bursts. When they finally reached safety, someone asked him how he knew when to move. He gave the same answer he'd given the lieutenant months earlier, "I just knew." From that night forward, the squad looked to him first. Not because he wanted command, he never did, but because fear naturally gravitates toward the calmest man in the room. When promotions came, Cooper tried to decline them. It didn't matter. Leadership found him anyway, partly because the Marines needed men who didn't break easily, but mostly because Cooper knew how to pull others back from the brink. Yet even his instincts had limits. During November, as temperatures plummeted and the Chinese encirclement tightened, Cooper found himself making decisions with less margin for error and more consequences for the smallest misstep. The Chosin campaign hadn't just become a battle. It had become a test of who could endure the cold long enough to stay human. And then came the moment that would propel Cooper into the impossible. The mortar strike that wiped out their entire ammo supply. Men panicked, some prayed, some cursed. Others waited for orders that never came. Cooper didn't freeze, didn't scream, didn't break. He just stared at the smoking crater where their ammunition had been and felt the faint, familiar shift, the same one he'd felt before storms back on the farm, the one that told him a line had been crossed and there was no returning to normal. His squad was about to face an overwhelming enemy force with no bullets. No backup. No hope. But Cooper still had one weapon left, the one he had been honing his entire life. The moment the mortar strike gutted their ammunition supply, the world around Fox Company shrank into a single, merciless truth. They were trapped in the mountains with nothing left that could kill an enemy. And yet, an entire enemy regiment was moving toward them with perfect confidence, certain they were closing in on a weakened, half-frozen unit ready to break. But Sergeant Elias Cooper wasn't planning to break. He crouched behind a snow-packed boulder, the cold searing through his uniform like needles pressing into bone. He watched the enemy lanterns flicker along the ridgeline, tiny beads of orange weaving through the dark, forming into patterns he recognized. Squad units, sentry rotations, flanking moves, they were tightening a noose around Fox Company, one loop at a time. He breathed steadily, forcing warmth into his hands, though his fingers had long since gone numb. The squad gathered around him in a semicircle, 11 men left, faces chalk-white under frostbite, eyes wide with the knowledge that if Cooper didn't have a plan, they were dead within the hour. Hanley broke the silence first. "Sergeant, we should withdraw, try to get back to the perimeter." Cooper didn't look at him. "That ridge is already cut off." "Then what?" Private Torres asked. "We can't fight a whole company with nothing." Cooper turned to them, finally letting his eyes focus on each of their faces. He could see the tremor in Hanley's jaw, the dried blood around Torres' left ear, frost crusting on Corporal Darnell's lashes. They weren't warriors right now, they were exhausted animals running on instinct and prayer. But they were still alive. That alone meant something. Cooper drew a map in the snow with his gloved finger, a crude outline of the terrain, the mountain bowl, the frozen lake, their trench line, the ridge where the enemy appeared, even the broken ammo tent now just a scatter of debris. "The Chinese think we have more men behind us," Cooper said quietly. "They think we've been holding this line because we're waiting for reinforcements." Darnell scoffed. "We don't have reinforcements." "Exactly," Cooper replied, "but they don't know that." He pointed to the ridgeline. "They're not charging because they're cautious, they're probing, they don't like surprises in this terrain. The cold messes with sound, echoes double, triple, they can't trust what they hear." Hanley frowned. "What's that got to do with us having no ammo?" Cooper dragged his glove across the snow, erasing the map. "It means we can lie to them." The squad stared at him. Torres spoke first. "You want to bluff an entire regiment?" "No," Cooper said, his voice was steady. "I want to convince them they're about to walk into a kill zone." He explained it in deliberate, icy detail, how valley acoustics could be manipulated, how sequential firing commands could echo like rotating platoons, how cycling empty rifles in staggered waves would mimic reload drills of a much larger force, how the enemy, already spooked by the cold and the uncertainty of night operations, might interpret the sound as an ambush forming. It was insane. It was desperate. It was their only option. But the bluff alone wasn't enough. They needed to sell it. Cooper assigned roles with the sharp precision of a man who had already accepted that death was a companion sitting beside him, waiting patiently. Hanley and Torres would control the timing. Darnell would call out fake range adjustments to create the illusion of sniper overwatch. Others would move along the trench to spread sound across a wider field. Cooper, as always, would be up front. Visible. Deliberate. The one the enemy might mistake for a commander giving orders to an army hidden in the dark. A blast of icy wind tore through the trench, knocking snow into their faces. The mountains groaned around them like old machinery. Somewhere far off, a wounded man screamed, his voice echoing across the frozen bowl before fading into nothing. The squad waited for Cooper to say something, anything reassuring, but he didn't believe in comfort, he believed in truth. "If this works," Cooper said, "we survive the night." "And if it does?" Hanley asked. Cooper didn't blink. "Then they'll overrun us, and it'll be fast." A long silence swallowed the trench. Finally, Torres tightened his jaw. Then let's give them a reason to hesitate. One by one, the men nodded. Small, breathless gestures. Fear wasn't gone, it never would be, but something else had settled in: purpose, unity, even a strange, bitter humor. They were about to fight an army with empty guns and a handful of voices. Cooper rose from the trench, snow cracking beneath his boots. He stared at the ridgeline where enemy silhouettes sharpened in the moonlight. The moment was coming. The final test. The kind of gamble you could only make once in a lifetime. "There is no turning back now," he whispered. The wind carried his words into the dark, where the enemy waited. The first hint that the enemy was moving came not from sight, but from vibration, the faint tremor of synchronized boots pressing into snow, a rhythm too deliberate to be random. Sergeant Elias Cooper lifted his head above the frozen berm just enough to see the shadows shifting across the ridgeline like a tide preparing to break. His squad knelt behind him in the trench, each man cradling an empty rifle like a relic rather than a weapon. Their breath plumed upward in frantic bursts, frost gathering on their lashes. Every second dragged across their nerves like a blade. Cooper raised one gloved fist. Stillness fell over them. The Chinese assault force was making the classic pincer sweep, a wide arc through the bowl and a tighter push along the right flank. They weren't charging blindly anymore. They were hunting, and their movements said everything. Something about this position wasn't adding up for them. Good. Fear was contagious. But if the enemy realized the truth, if even one soldier spotted the lack of muzzle flashes, they'd descend on Fox Company like a suffocating wave. 12 men would vanish beneath thousands. Cooper studied the terrain one last time. The frozen lake below caught the faint moonlight and bounced it upward, refracting it across jagged ice. The mountain walls curved in a way that turned sound into a ricocheting chorus. It could amplify, distort, multiply. Assuming they used it perfectly. He breathed in, a long cold drag that made his ribs ache. Then he whispered, "Volley 1." Instantly, 12 rifles rose over the trench line. Cooper shouted fire. Clicks. Nothing but clicks. But in the chaos of night and valley acoustics, the sequence sounded like gunfire smothered by snow, followed by the metallic snarl of synchronized reloads. Cooper watched the ridge. Dozens of enemy helmets jerked back instinctively. Some slowed, some crouched, the entire front line stalled. "Hold," Cooper murmured. He needed to push their fear further, to turn hesitation into dread. Volley 2 spread it. His men leaned left and right, adjusting positions so the clacking of empty bolts rippled across the trench at staggered intervals. Clack clack. Clack. Clack clack clack. The mountains caught the sound and threw it back threefold. It became a line of rifles firing in depth, like multiple platoons rotating volleys with icy discipline. Cooper felt the shift the instant it happened. The enemy commander hesitated. A silhouette barked orders, short, sharp, panicked. Men on the left flank slowed their advance. They weren't sure what they were hearing. Cooper pressed the advantage. "Darnell, call ranges," loud. Corporal Darnell stood tall enough to make himself a target and shouted into the dark with the confidence of a seasoned spotter. "Range 300 meters, adjust sights elevation .3. It was nonsense. Complete fiction. But it sounded like battlefield communication. Sounded like competence. Sounded like a unit preparing a controlled kill zone. Cooper slammed his bolt back again. Clack. Hanley picked up the rhythm. Tours followed. The others fell into cadence. And then something extraordinary happened. The enemy stopped advancing. A full regiment, thousands of men halted in unison, shifting uneasily, scanning the mountain walls for a force that didn't exist. Their discipline cracked along the edges. One soldier broke formation, then another. A few ducked for cover. A few muttered frantically to their officers. But the bluff wasn't finished. Cooper pointed to the far left of the trench. "Tours run full sprint, make them think we're repositioning." Tours didn't hesitate. He dashed through the snow, boots crashing against ice, creating the thunder of movement that echoed across the bowl like squads redeploying. The effect was immediate. The enemy commander shouted again, this time in frantic disbelief. He'd miscalculated. He thought Fox Company had maneuver elements sweeping to outflank him in the dark. Cooper stood fully now, making himself a silhouette against the moonlit snow. If the enemy needed a commander to fear, he would play the part. He aimed his empty rifle. "Volley 3, he roared. Every man screamed the word fire. Every rifle clicked. Every bolt racked with sharp military precision. And the mountains responded with a roar. From somewhere deep in the valley, a second echo rose, slow, thunderous, rolling like artillery. It wasn't real, but the acoustic reflection warped their phantom gunfire into something monstrous. The Chinese front line broke. Not cleanly, not all at once, but in a stuttering ripple of men falling back, shouting, signaling wildly in the dark. The commander tried to rally them, waving his arm desperately, but the fear had already metastasized. They didn't believe they were facing a squad anymore. They believed they had stumbled into the jaws of a battalion. Cooper felt his heart hammering in his chest, each beat like a drum signaling survival. But he didn't celebrate. His instincts screamed that the night wasn't finished with them yet. The enemy wasn't retreating. They were regrouping. And when they came back, because they wouldn't make the same mistake twice. The bluff had bought time. Minutes at most. Maybe only seconds. Cooper crouched back down into the trench, breath ragged, eyes burning from cold and adrenaline. The real fight hadn't even begun. For a moment, just long enough for breath to return to lungs and sensation to creep back into numb fingers, the mountains fell quiet. Not peaceful quiet, not gentle quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when an enemy is deciding whether to attack or vanish into the dark. Sergeant Elias Cooper crouched in the trench, snow gathered on his shoulders like ash. His men leaned against the frozen earth, chests heaving, eyes dilated with a mixture of disbelief and raw terror. They had pushed back a regiment with nothing but sound and human will. It felt impossible. It was impossible, and yet they were still alive. For now. Cooper scanned the ridgeline again. No lanterns, no silhouettes, no movement except the bitter wind curling through the rocks. The Chinese forces had melted into the night, reorganizing somewhere beyond view. The bluff had worked, but only as a delay. Sooner or later, the enemy would realize no reinforcements were coming. No heavy weapons, no artillery, just a dozen freezing men clinging to a trench carved into a dying mountainside. The knowledge settled over them like a new layer of frost. Hanley broke the silence. His voice trembled not from cold but from aftershock. "Sergeant, we really did that." Cooper didn't answer. He wasn't ready to take ownership of a miracle, not until the sun rose, not until they had proof the bluff had done more than buy a few moments of breath. Torres rubbed his hands together, staring at the metal of his rifle like it might magically produce ammunition. "They thought we had a whole damn battalion." "They won't think that forever," Cooper said quietly. That truth landed hard. A few men lowered their heads, one cursed under his breath. Another let out a dry, cracked laugh, a sound halfway between triumph and despair. The cold intensified, as if the mountains themselves were leaning closer, listening. Cooper looked at each man, memorizing their faces. The frost-bitten cheeks, the cracked lips, the fear that radiated in tiny tremors along their jawlines, the exhaustion pooled in their shoulders. He knew some of them wouldn't live through the next hour if the enemy returned. But he also saw something else there, something wordless and heavy. They trusted him. Not because he was strong. Not because he was fearless. Because he had guided them through impossibility. And that trust carved a wound deeper than any bullet. He stood slowly, feeling tendons creak like old rope, his breath fogged upward in jagged bursts. "Spread out," he said, "show movement, keep them guessing." Movement meant life. Stillness meant death. The men rose, stumbling through the snow, each footfall a hollow thud against ice. Their bodies swayed like scarecrows pulled upright by stubbornness alone, and yet they moved. Minutes passed. Then more. Long enough that the silence became suffocating. Cooper scanned the ridge again, nothing. Then he saw it. Far off, tiny, hesitant lanterns began drifting backward, away from the valley, away from the trench. The enemy was withdrawing. Not retreating in panic. Not routing. Withdrawing. Deliberate, controlled. But unmistakable. Cooper exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His knees nearly buckled, the tremor running up his legs like a lightning flash of relief and exhaustion fused into one. "They're pulling back," Darnell whispered. No one cheered, no one moved. They were too cold for triumph, too stunned for celebration. Survival in moments like this didn't feel like victory. It felt like a reprieve handed down by a universe that had already decided the mountain would kill them, but not tonight. Hanley slumped against the trench wall, sliding down until he sat with his knees pulled to his chest. "Sergeant," he said, voice barely audible, "we actually made them believe ghosts were firing at them." Cooper didn't smile, couldn't. He felt the weight of every decision pressing down on him, the lies he'd woven, the fear he'd exploited, the psychological knife edge he'd forced his men to stand on. He thought back to Kansas, to storms on the horizon, to the night he'd pulled his parents into the crawl space while the world above them tore apart. Back then he'd sensed danger. Tonight he'd become it. Torres limped over, exhaustion in every step. "What happens now, Sarge?" Cooper looked to the east, where the faintest smear of gray hinted at dawn. "We hold until relief finds us," he said, "or until the mountain decides otherwise." No one questioned it. No one challenged him. They simply accepted the answer because they needed to believe the man who beat an army without firing a shot might also beat the cold, the hunger, the night. As light began creeping across the ridgelines, the battlefield revealed its truth. Footprints of thousands stretching away, abandoned equipment, signs of a force that had chosen caution over conquest. And 12 men, ghosts in tattered uniforms, still breathing. Cooper closed his eyes just for a moment, not to rest, to mark the moment, to promise himself he would remember every detail, every shadow, every heartbeat that brought them to this sunrise. The world would never know what they had faced, what they had risked, what it cost them. But Cooper knew. And that was enough. When he finally spoke, the words were barely more than a whisper carried off by the wind. "Let's go home." If you want more stories like this, deep, cinematic, and brutally human, make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this documentary with someone who loves history told without sugarcoating. And